This podcast was brought to you by Meros Cryptocurrency. Meros is a cryptocurrency payment system that does what cryptocurrency originally intended to do. Be a practical and secure form of direct payment, Meros utilizes the best of current technology in a powerful new way. It introduces a groundbreaking consensus mechanism called merit caching. This enables Meros to be both feeless and instant while maintaining the same level of integrity of traditional networks like Bitcoin. To find out how you can participate in the future of crypto payments, go to meroscrypto.io now.
Hello and welcome to the July edition of State of the Project Devault. Now, just in case you don't know, well, this is only the second episode actually, so just in case you don't know, this is a monthly podcast where we'll be looking into everything that is happening with this brand new project called Devault. Now, today I am joined by a day one contributor. I believe the term is a day one contributor, and his name is Spock. He's actually joined us before on Developers Corner around about a year ago, I believe. So Spock, it's great to have you here. How are you?
Good to chat with you again.
Awesome. So just in case some people have missed out on Devault and your work in the past, could you tell us a little bit about how you found out about Devault and what were your motivations for working on it?
Okay, well, I've known one of the kind of main drivers behind Devault for probably 3 or 4 years now. So we were both involved in Dash back in 2016, and I was there for a few months. The project kind of split. Their community split, and some of us hung around a little more and some went separate ways. And around that time I started getting involved in Pivx, and Decentralized was kind of a little bit involved, but then became involved in another project. So basically I stayed in touch with Decentralized for a while, and around, I guess, last summer or so, he said he was starting up a new project, to get a new project going. So we chatted, and so that was when I first heard about it. They didn't even have a name then at that point. And, it sounded like the project was going to be similar to some other projects in terms of having master nodes and various other things. So I didn't have a project at that point. I was kind of working on my own thing. And I'm like, I didn't want to really get involved in another kind of master node project. So Decentralized did find a development team that he was working with. And like I said, we kind of kept in touch. And then I guess around January or so of this year, it just was apparent he was making no progress at all. And at that point, I just said, okay, maybe I can just help out and get it launched. So my kind of plan was just to do a minimal amount of work to help get the project going. And once I started doing it, I was kind of enjoying what I was doing, and I just kind of kept at it. And the couple of weeks kind of turned into 2 or 3 months. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it all happened. And, I was working a lot with Proteus, who's an excellent developer and kind of all around IT and crypto type person. So things just kind of moved along really well. And there's no one really pressuring us to you got to get done by this date. And so we're just kind of enjoying developing it, and kind of that's how it all happened.
Awesome. Now I guess we've come along quite similar lines through Crypto Dash, then Pivx, and then to where we are now, I guess. And I've always known you've never been the type of developer to jump into something lightly. So can you remember I would have loved to have been there, but what was the sales pitch like when Decentralized actually said to you about this new project? Can you remember what it was about Devault that really got you hooked? Was it because there were no master nodes, no ICO, or the coin emission? What was the deciding factor for you?
Well, I think the idea was that it was supposed to be more of a community-governed coin. And I've kind of been through this a few times too, that Dash said they were doing that, but then it turned out it was really driven by a very small amount of people and only masternode holders. And then Pivx came along and said, well, we're going to do community governance, and we're going to make it so everybody can vote. And that was kind of one of the sales pitches for Pivx for a while. And then it turned out they didn't really want to change the governance. And so again, it was dominated by 2 or 3 people that were deciding everything. So again, now we have Devault, and there's, we're talking about the same thing. I mean, the difference for me is that I know decentralized for years, and I know quite a few of the other people as well. And I think they've been through that a few times, and I think they all have good intentions to try to make this work. No one's in it for a short, quick profit. I think, it's people have been around a while, and they're, I think they really want to see something work. And in addition, I kind of think quite a few were involved with Smart Cash, which was another type kind of community governance project, which also had similar problems in terms of being heavily dominated by a couple of people. So I think, it's going to take us a while to get there, but I think the intentions are good, and we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, see, I've actually, I think you're absolutely right. I've watched these things play out time and time again, where the intentions are right, but then you tend to find when the power does slip into the hands of a few people, it's very difficult to then redisperse it. And I think that probably takes me on very nicely to my next question, which is, what is sharkflation, and what is it supposed to achieve?
Okay, well, yeah, that was, I think that was my idea. We discussed that. There was another person involved initially with Default who then went off to do Smart Cash that also had similar idea, I think. So the idea was that the problem with lots of coins is it starts off with some emission rate, and people are the first people in the project, buy up a lot of the coins initially, and then the inflation starts kind of dropping off, and those early holders own a lot of coins, and because just the initial forces there, it tends to drive the price up, and then it's hard for other people to actually buy much shares that are coins at a decent price. So basically the project kind of comes too heavily dominated by the first 10 or 20 people that are in the project, in my opinion. And then it kind of struggles after that. And sometimes you get a kind of a dumping effect that once the price goes up, then they dump. So the idea with shark inflation was that the coin emission rate would go up for about a year or two, so that there'll be an increasing supply of coins for the first year as blocks go by. So it was going to be much harder for the first 20 people or so to buy up a lot of the coins. It basically, someone won't look like 3 months into the project and think, oh, most of the coins are already been dispersed and it's already been kind of dominated. So it's just easier for people to potentially get in at a lower price, because the higher inflation should tend to keep the price from ramping up too much, because you can't really predict the price regardless of what inflation you do, because you really don't know how many people are going to be interested in a project. But it was an attempt to do that.
So, to your knowledge, has any other projects used shark inflation before, or is Devault the first one?
Well, this is the first one, I think, to use that particular equation to change the coin emission. But there was a project, I think it was called Equibit or something, where I first came across the idea. And there's some also projects that done something called slow mining, where they ramped up the coin emission over a month or so. And I think it was just part of the reason for that was just that they were afraid there could be a lot of problems initially, and so they didn't want people to lose a lot of coins. So they started slow and then went up. But like I said, the other one, they did, there was an article about the kind of theory behind it, was that you should think of coin emissions similar to like mining and, mining for some new mineral or something. And the typical process, like, mining for gold or oil or whatever, is that, you start off and it takes time to develop your tools and equipment. And so basically the efficiency gets better for a year or so. And as efficiency is better, you're able to extract more of the product, more of the oil or gold or whatever. So you'd expect the amount to increase, and then you tend to peak, and then it kind of tends to go down. So that was the kind of idea behind it, I think. Yeah.
Okay, and what is the total increase? What's the total increase between the original coin emission rate and then the coin emission rate when it's at its actual peak at the top of the shark's fin?
Yeah, it's basically 2 to 1. So we started at 500 coins per block for miners, and at the peak it'll be 1,000 coins per block for the miners. So
okay, and do you think that this effectively doubling of the emission rate goes far enough to account for the growing interest that will be developed in the project?
It's hard to say because, you can't predict these things. You can't predict if a lot of people get interested in cryptocurrencies and our coin. And, there's so many factors that it's impossible. I mean, any inflation curve, I think it's a guess. And, the other thing we wanted to avoid, which was the way Bitcoin did it and the way many other coins just copy, is where the coin emission rate is fixed, but then every 4 years, I think it is, or 2 years, it just drops by a factor of 50%. So you kind of end up getting these big discontinuities, and people get all worked up about, when this event is going to happen. And it kind of creates weird type activity because people get focused around that event. So the way we're doing it, it's more like a continuous curve where it's either going up or going down, but it's very slowly. So there won't be any focus on any particular time when, the inflation rate will suddenly change. I think that's a better way to do it as well.
Yeah, that does sound very interesting. I've not actually known a project that had a gradual decrease. It is usually halvings and things like that, which are the focal point for a lot of I don't want to say market manipulation, but definitely market forces where people start to speculate. Well, if the emission rate drops by 50%, then the price will jump by so and so. So it's quite an interesting approach you guys have taken. I wanted to move on. What we do on State of the Project, just to let the listeners know, is that we allow anyone to submit questions. So if you go into the Devault project Discord, the link will be in the description, and go to, I believe it's the Devault podcast channel. You can drop questions in there and I'll pick up the questions. The best questions will win 10 Devault, as donated by JS Kitty, I believe it was. So yeah, the best questions will win 10 Devault. I won't be able to get through all of the questions, as we had about 50 this time round. So I've only picked out a few. This one is a follow-up from actually Decentralized, who we spoke about earlier in the podcast. And he said, it's about the inflation. He said, is there a reason that you chose an unlimited inflation, technically unlimited, even if it is just one coin per block? So I'm assuming it trends towards zero. Is there a reason why there's going to be forever an increase in the supply?
Well, I think it's just an artifact of the curve that we picked for the gradual decrease. Once it peaks, it just goes down very gradually. And at this point, I didn't see a need to force it to end at a particular time or, put anything, different there. I mean, realistically, we can't predict 20 years out or whatever. So we could have said, after 10 years or 20 years, it's going to stop and it's just going to be fees. And I'm sure a lot of people would be excited then because it's like, oh, it's a max supply. But, I don't think it matters that much. And the other thing is that, like I said, the inflation is somewhat, best estimate. And I think you need to be flexible. And I think we have to see where the coin goes. And if it's really a community governance coin, 10 years out, they might decide, we really need to have more inflation or a little more inflation. Or maybe they want to decide we're just going to say we're going to cap it. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to just say this is what is going to be forever. That people starting it are going to just dictate everything forever. I think even there will be a temptation for big coins like Bitcoin to rethink that as time goes by. It's and a lot of people have written about this, that can miners really be profitable just on fees alone? And it's debatable. So if they're not, they'll be forced to increase the coin supply a bit more just to keep the thing going. Yeah, so I think having some amount for the miners, even if it's very low, is better than just surviving on fees. So, but we'll see how things play out as well, I think.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. If the block size debate was anything to go by, I think if there is one that comes along about the total supply of Bitcoin, that could rage on for a while and become pretty vicious. So I'm not looking forward to that. Bitcoin itself doesn't have. Yeah, Bitcoin has no governance, does it? So how would they decide?
Yeah, it's just I think it's just what people follow or what the miners follow. So, I mean, So, I mean, the idea of Bitcoin had, is always said basically the supply was fixed, but, they have changed various things, like you said, block size and things like that. So, you got to be able to change things as time goes on. And, just like I said, I think trying to set everything on day one is not, it's just not very realistic.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Okay, so I guess the long-term plan is that the governance works, and whatever decision Devault does take, 5 years, 10 years, if the chain lasts that long, whatever decision it does make, it will be at least, I don't want to use the word fair because it's quite a bad word, but it will at least not be as centralized as if, say, Bitcoin were to do it tomorrow, in which case maybe Blockstream would decide this is what's going to happen. So the idea that you guys have put in place is that the governance starts off in a much more decentralized fashion. And then when it comes to time to make these big decisions, hopefully things are a lot more efficient and a lot more people get a say. Is that fair? Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, I think that's what we're aiming for. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, on to the next question. This one is actually from myself. Obviously, we and you have spoken quite a lot about Codebase. I've learned a tremendous amount from you just through the chats we've had in Discord. And I was really curious as to why you chose Bitcoin Cash as the base to start from, if indeed you chose it. But how did Bitcoin Cash come about? Yeah,
well, we looked at some different code bases, and we actually started with Navcoin, and we did maybe a week or two work on that. And I think, another thing longer term, some of us were thinking is that we would move to proof of stake. And that still may happen, although we have not really talked about it very much. And if it does happen, it's probably years out. But so that was part of the reason we're thinking of Navcoin. And they had some governance, and they had a pretty good code base. But once we spent some time on it, we realized that most of their features we wouldn't be able to use right away because we weren't going to go initially proof of stake. So we'd end up having to redo a lot. So then we basically said, well, let's start with, a Bitcoin code base. And, the options are Bitcoin itself or Bitcoin Cash or maybe one other clone. And I was kind of familiar with Bitcoin Cash and been kind of following the code base for a while. And, we didn't also see a need for SegWit. And to me, it just kind of complicates things. It's, having different addressing schemes and it's it's a little bit of a mess for me. And when I looked at the Bitcoin Cash code base, I see that they were doing a lot of things that were like refactoring in terms of cleaning out old code and improving the code base. It really seemed like they were doing that a lot. And since I first started looking at it, I noticed now Bitcoin are starting to do the same. They're really trying to sort out things to make it easier to use the code. And so that was kind of the basis for that decision, that it didn't really have, extra things that weren't there, that weren't needed, such as SegWit. And, the code was in decent shape, and it's very active project as well. So I think those are the main reasons.
Awesome. And this far in, I know I don't think we're even a month yet into the project, but so far you've not seen anything that has kind of made you feel perhaps we could have gone in a different direction. So far, everything seems to be going your way.
Yeah, I don't see any major reasons to regret that decision. So, there's a couple other things that are already in Bitcoin Cash that we may use, which is the Schnorr signatures, and there's another thing called Avalanche. So we've inherited those. We'll probably wait a bit more to see how they work out for Bitcoin Cash, and then if they're successful, we can start enabling them, and if they're not, we can just remove them. So there's definitely some future possible benefits there that was already in the code, as opposed to Bitcoin, which have not really added those features.
That's very interesting. I'm going to go off script a little bit here, but do you know? I don't know if you will know, but what is the reason why Bitcoin Cash seemed to be able to add these features a lot quicker, whereas Bitcoin? I heard one of the devs for Bitcoin on a podcast recently say that if they do add Schnorr, it will take years. Why is Bitcoin so slow to add features?
I think it's a guess from basically. What I've noticed working at corporations is the bigger corporations and that have software or hardware out there that's been out for a while tend to be very, very conservative and don't really like taking any risks. And they tend to have a lot of bureaucracy as well. So I think Bitcoin is a bit like that, maybe improving now, but they really, are scared of doing anything that might cause people to lose money, because there's a lot of money at stake. That, and you get kind of a bit of a bureaucracy, and you get gatekeepers that make it difficult for new people to contribute and things like that. So I think Bitcoin Cash is a newer project. It's a smaller team, and it just feels like they're more aggressive in getting things done. And maybe in some cases they're taking a little bit. As a newer project, smaller project, in a way, you have to take more risks, because that's the only way you can, outshine somebody else. So, I think that's just kind of part of the nature of how projects are.
And I guess that suits you and Devault down to the ground, because if Bitcoin Cash are adding more features, then you've got more features to actually choose from that you're not going to have to design and implement yourselves completely.
Right. And, like I said, a couple of those features are, they're pretty promising. So,
What is Avalanche? Because this is the first I've heard of it.
Oh, okay. It's a consensus mechanism. So it would be too hard to explain briefly here. But the idea was to get to something also a little closer to zero confirmation, that by basically you're using nodes, you can have dedicated nodes for it, I think. And it's kind of a voting type consensus mechanism, but it's one that allows you to get to consensus very fast. So you can kind of lock in the block or a transaction very, very quickly. So,
So we're kind of, I guess it leads us back to using Devault to pay for a cup of coffee, which is kind of what Bitcoin was sold on years ago. And now, obviously, when I send a Bitcoin transaction, it takes a couple of weeks to arrive or whatever it is. Well, it definitely takes longer than I'd stay in a coffee shop. Okay, all right. Yeah. So what I'll do, I'll see if I can. Well, I won't see if I can. I'm going to ask you if you can send me over a link for some literature on Avalanche, and then I'll just add that to the description, and people can have a look at their own leisure. But that's really interesting. I was totally unaware about that, so I'll have to do some research on that. I'm going to move on. My next question is another community donated question, and this one is from Lex. Lex is another day one contributor, and he has asked, I couldn't help but notice you've been developing for the last 3, 4, or even 5 months for Devault. From our conversation just now, I guess it's over 6 months now, without receiving any funds for doing so. Could you elaborate on your choice to basically work for free? I think that's a really good question. We did speak about this in our Developers Corner, and what it is worth noting is that you've got a really extensive history in development, and you've worked for corporations. You've done a lot in the space already. So for you to do something purely for the love of it is quite an eye turner, and I guess that's what Lex is getting at. What was the reason for working for free for so long?
This podcast has been brought to you by Rhubarb Media. Rhubarb Media are the branding specialists behind successful crypto projects such as PivX, Vendible, and Libertaria. The Rhubarb style is both loved and respected the world over. So if you want your project to appeal to techies and everyday users alike, give Rhubarb Media a try. You cannot possibly be disappointed. Link is in the description.
Well, I mean, I think, if I believed in the project and I enjoy doing it, then I don't really need the money so much. I mean, I'm not like saying I shouldn't get paid at all, but I can afford to spend some time doing stuff without really needing the money, because I do have a full-time job as well. And that's kind of how Pivot started too. I just started working there without any salary or anything initially, because I actually thought it was a good project. And, I did get offered some money to help, but on Devault. And, part of the thing about decentralized governance and project and stuff is, any project will start off with having some power structures. And, if someone is paying me, it's almost like I'm working for them and they're the boss. And it creates this, atmosphere of I owe them stuff and I have to do what they want. And it becomes very centralized in that manner. And, then they feel like they're owed by the project to get their money back, or, things like that. So I think it just creates kind of bad incentives potentially. So my preference was really just to do what I could without requiring money. And then, we will have a budget for development. And so I'm going to be, taking funds for that to help compensate for the time I did spend and for future time. So I think it's better that if I'm paid as a developer, I'm kind of paid by everyone, through the coin distribution, rather than getting paid one or two people and, having them kind of in this position where then they can think they can tell me what to do all the time because, I paid you this, I mean, and I'm not saying anybody in this project is like that, but, it avoids that whole kind of issue for me.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. I think you sounding like a very old school crypto guy. Do you remember when you first got into crypto, how there was a much different atmosphere where it wasn't all about making as much money as you could make? It was more about doing things for the greater good. And it seems like with what you've done with Devault, that seems to be the driving factor as opposed to lining your own pockets. Kind of like a follow-on question, which I've just thought of as you've been speaking, but do you feel that there's in much the same way as Charlie Lee sold all of his Litecoin, do you feel that there may be a conflict of interest for yourself personally if you do hold a lot of Devault? Let's say you was being paid at the beginning in Devault and you end up being one of the people who does hold a lot. Do you think it can impact on how much risks you take with the code base and what types of things you then decide to implement? Do you ever worry about that becoming an issue?
Yeah, I think it would have an impact, and I think there's a balance, because I look at some ways that starting a coin is a bit like starting a startup company, and you do want the founders, what I call the founders, to have enough incentive to work on it that they'll put their time and effort into it. So there has to be some kind of compensation for them to make it worth their while. And usually in a startup, it's stock. And, the thing about stock often is that you have to kind of vest it over a few years. So in other words, you don't get all paid up front and you can't just kind of dump it right away when you want to. So crypto seems to be lacking that to some degree, that if the coin went up a lot, you could dump it. So on the one hand, you do want some incentive, but on the other hand, you don't want to give too much. And I'm not quite sure what else to say about that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I just wanted to really get your thoughts on that kind of conflict that can happen between lining your own pockets or your own personal ambition and what is best for the project. My next question. It's actually my final question, which is good because we are running out of time. The final question has come. It's another community question. I probably would have asked you this anyway, but congratulations to Pest for asking this one. And it is, what secret stuff is Spock working on?
At the moment, I'm not working on anything secret, so everything is just openly being developed on GitHub, and we're still in a process of kind of tightening up the code and cleaning out stuff we don't need, things like that. So we do have some ideas, at least I do, of things we'd like to do. I think we do keep an eye on privacy, and if that's something we add, that'll take several months probably. There's some other things going on in that I'm thinking about too. I mean, one issue we've seen already is that sometimes you get a case where someone throws an awful lot of hash on the coin, and apparently a couple of times it happened by mistake, and the difficulty ramps way up, and then they realize their mistake and they turn it off. And then suddenly you get blocks that take 4 hours or 2 hours, or it takes several hours for the coin to kind of to stabilize back to its normal block time. At this point, nobody's probably that worried about it, but longer term, it's not good. And this is an artifact of just using SHA-256 with so much mining power being available to everyone. So I'm thinking about ways to counteract that so that we won't get these huge block times, which obviously if you're trying to spend the money in a retail store or something, it would be quite hazardous to have that. No deep plans really are of anything specifically at the moment. We're just kind of keeping an eye out for potential solutions to some of the things we can see coming, in the next couple of years.
Do you think the issue with the masses of hash power is something that will only happen whilst the project is very young and doesn't have much hash power being pushed towards it? Let's say in like a year or 2 years' time, when the project is more well known and more people are mining it, it'll be a bit more difficult for somebody to throw that much of a hash at the project and create these problems. Is that fair to say?
I think it's not 100% fair. I mean, I think there's still, so Bitcoin Cash has been around quite a while, and they have a decent amount of hash power, but there's still, the problem is, as long as there's a a much bigger project that is around, and that hash power can move around easily, then it's always a potential threat. And it's, in some ways, as a smaller coin, you're less likely to get people who want to mess with you because you're not a threat. As you get bigger, you become a bigger threat, and so you might actually attract more of these kind of attacks. So, and this is part of the reason why people choose GPU algorithms or CPU algorithms, is to avoid this kind of thing. So at the moment, we're not thinking of changing algorithms, but that's also another potential avenue too. And the problem with GPU also, because there's still large pools around, is the GPU doesn't really solve the problem either. If you, for example, if you went X16, which Ravencoin uses, there's already so much hash power that, doing that, or in fact, any GPU algorithm, the GPUs can just switch algorithms, in minutes probably. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just going back to your description of your work on GitHub, is that how you intend to work moving forward with everything on GitHub, or what sorts of things would you do that you wouldn't actually develop in public? When will there be times when you will start to work on secret stuff, as Pest put it?
Yeah, I think, in the very early stages of something, I might just do it privately. And, it depends on how big a team we have, I mean, there's no real need to kind of push everything to GitHub right away. So I think if it's really something experimental before, I think it's, just if something is not 100% clear that, it's something that we're going to do, that kind of an experimentation phase, our proof of concept phase, I don't think that may not go on GitHub, because I think it there's a few different reasons. It's just easier to just kind of develop things without too much attention and stuff like that. But I wouldn't like that phase to continue very long. So the way I see it, basically Devault itself was developed for several months in the open, and so anybody could have copied it and even launched before we did. But with any kind of complex code, there's often so many bugs and things changing all the time that even if you put it out there, the chances of someone just copying it and kind of beating you to it are actually very small, I think. So for the sake of the transparency, I think it's often better just to put it out there, and rather than, doing everything hidden. And it's better for the community too, to see that there's work going on, and, that the devs haven't just disappeared or something. So in general, I prefer to do things, in the public, or to have it available for people to see what's going on.
Awesome. It's interesting that you say that, because it's in the public, anybody could just copy it and release it before you. But I think you're giving everybody a bit too much credit, because I certainly wouldn't be able to copy it and release it before you. So yeah, I agree. And it's good to see that you don't hide things because of not wanting to let competitors know. I'm doing the bunny rabbit ears as well, because I find that quite a lot in crypto, and it frustrates me when teams say, we don't want to let our competitors know what we're doing. So it's good that you're keeping the spirit of open source alive with this project as well. Spock, before I let you go, is there anything else you wanted to speak about, or to let the listeners know about regarding Devault?
Oh, so there was one thing I thought would be good to touch on a little bit, which is user experience. So,
yes.
So I think people in crypto know how hard it is to use wallets and things like that. So, I think if we're not doing some major thing like adding privacy or something. I think for the short term, we'll be trying to focus on user experience and make it easier to use and just more fun to use. I mean, because I know with some of the privacy projects, you end up downloading a wallet and it takes hours or days to sync the wallet, and then you go to send a transaction and the wallet freezes, and there's just so many issues from a user experience. It's very frustrating to use, and like even for me, years back when I used Monero a bit, I'm just like, I could never see this people wanting to use it. It was so hard to use and so slow. So so I don't know if people noticed. I think I noticed one guy did a review of our wallet, and when he started up, he said, "Oh, it looks like it is synced already. That can't be true. That never happens," or something like that. And it actually it started up and had synced very quickly. Now, part of the reason it syncs quickly is because the chain is very small at this point. But I think most people will notice that when they start up the wallet, the GUI comes right up, in a very short time, and as opposed to kind of sitting there with a splash screen for 5 minutes before it comes up. Yeah. And that is something that we did spend time. We took things out of the code that nobody, like one example is BIP 70. I'm sure a lot of people don't even know what that is, but no. Yeah, it's something that's basically in general, people, clone Bitcoin, and there's a lot of stuff they'll never use, but they either don't understand it, or they don't know how to remove it, or they just couldn't be bothered. And, so the BIP 70 thing is all about using authenticated SSL certificates and stuff like that. And it sits there on the network for, quite a bit of time looking for things and setting things up, and nobody's using it anyways. And, it was a little controversial at first, when I wanted to take that out. Some people were like, oh, no, we should leave it. But I noticed after we took it out that, that Bitcoin, and I think maybe even Bitcoin Cash, are now putting options to allow you to build the wallet without that feature. So, yeah. So there's some other things we did too. So, using the HD wallet with the keys and things like that, with the Bitcoin also, all the clones start up by generating like 2,000 keys for you. And the reason behind that was because you have to, before there was HD wallets, you basically would have to back up your wallet. And if you're doing lots of transactions and you used up all those keys, you'd have to back it up again because you'd be generating new keys. And so they just figured, well, let's generate 2,000 because most people won't, take them months or years to use that amount. Yeah. So, but then you sit there waiting 5 minutes for the wallet to start up the first time because it's spending all that time. And with HD keys, that's not really necessary at all. So we cut that down to 200, and I've recently actually been spending time to even streamline that more. So this all means that, like, I guess both the first time you use the wallet and consequent times when you start it up, it's going to start up a lot quicker. And, so I think, we'll be doing more. And, we in terms of our hardware, our HD seed processing and stuff, and smart rewards, cold rewards, we're going to be spending time to make that easier for people to use and understand stuff. So I think that's kind of the type of things we'll be doing next month or two.
Awesome. So the plan, it sounds like, is to make the full node a lot more like a light wallet, in that it kind of starts up a lot quicker and it's a lot easier to use. Will Devault have a light wallet? Is there any plans to have, I don't know, maybe an Electrum fork or something along those lines?
Yeah, we haven't talked about it too much. I mean, I think the most pressing thing we're working on is that we're going to be trying to get it integrated into Trust Wallet, which is a mobile wallet. Which
Okay.
I mean, I think the majority of people will gravitate towards mobile if they can. So the full wallet is good initially and for miners and things like that, but I don't see any reason why we can't put most of the features into a light wallet.
Yeah.
And have people just use their mobile wallets.
In terms of the graphical, the user interface, I know it's still early doors, but have you spoke about, I don't know, some other projects are moving away from Qt into using things like WebView, so they can render in HTML and produce these kind of different looking sorts of wallets front ends. Have you thought about that? Is that on the cards for Devault?
Yeah, we did speak about that a couple of months back, and the idea initially was not really to develop the Qt wallet at all.
Okay.
But I think, we basically, no one on the team is really a JavaScript or Electron type expert. So we would need to kind of get that talent in to do that. But so in the meantime, in terms of the seed word processing and the cold rewards, we decided, well, we should at least add those to Qt. But, so we will spend some more time on Qt, but I think ideally we, that does, allow a certain amount of separation and allow teams to kind of work on different things without everything being, too tightly coupled together. So, and I notice a part of what Bitcoin is doing in their refactoring is also trying to kind of clean up those interfaces to make, I think, those kind of things easier too. So it's just, I think it's a question of, how much longer we'll keep on the Qt and,
and
but
is it looking like months more than years that it will be Qt?
Yeah, I think so.
And your all of this has been happening before the first month's worth of funding has even arrived. So I'm assuming that when the actual development DAO does start to operate and you are getting that budget to expand the development team, you will be looking for, I guess, front end devs and other people to come in and provide those sorts of expertise. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Like to get more people involved. We have, one little project going to improve the seed word handlings to make sure that you've written it down, that we're working with a couple of people outside of the core team right now. And hopefully by the time it's done, we'll have budget money to be able to pay them. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Spock, thank you so much. We have run over, so I apologize for that. But the problem is you've just got so much information. I honestly could have carried on for another hour. So thank you so much for giving us your time. I'm assuming if anybody else has got any questions, it would be good to tell them they can go into the Discord where you're usually around and ask away there. Awesome. For anybody that's listening, thank you so much for making it to the end and congratulations. Please like and subscribe and all that other good stuff. We will be back next month when I plan to have Proteus and Bill on, two other day one contributors. Proteus is the developer that Spock was talking about earlier. But Spock, thank you very much for coming, and until next time, take care.
Thanks very much too. Take care. Bye.
This show is brought to you by PivX Private Instant Verified Transactions. With its groundbreaking zero-coin staking and masternodes, PivX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex.
And for more information, go to www.pivex.org.